After the 2020 election, the first Republican-controlled state to pass a big voter suppression law was Iowa. They did theirs on March 8th. The next day, March 9th, a lawsuit was filed against that anti-voting rights bill in Iowa with the help of Democratic voting rights lawyer Mark Elias and his organization Democracy Docket. After Iowa, then there was Georgia. March 25th, Georgia's Republican governor signed into law his state's anti-voting rights bill, signed it in a room with 6 other white men standing by while they all stood underneath a painting of a slave plantation. It was very subtle. That same day, Georgia got itself sued over that new law, again, with the help of Democratic lawyer Mark Elias. Then after that, it was Florida. Florida's Republican governor signed his state's anti-voting rights bill live on Fox News. Also very subtle. Florida soon found itself sued over that law, also, again, with the help of Democratic lawyer Mark Elias. Over and over again, in all those states, in Montana, in Arkansas, now most recently in Kansas, Republicans have expeditiously passed new laws to make it harder to vote, and Democratic voting rights lawyer Mark Elias has just as expeditiously sued them for it. Mark Elias clearly is on it. But he is also sounding a public alarm that, in his words, lawyers alone and these lawsuits alone are not going to solve this problem. Joining us now to explain why is Mark Elias, Democratic voting rights attorney. He's the founder of Democracy Docket. Mark, it's nice to see you. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me, Rachel.
I think a lot of people look at your track record over the course of your career, but your track record particularly in the past year, and they feel confident knowing that you are fighting these laws and that you are bringing these lawsuits, and they have a lot of faith in your ability to bat down some of the worst of this stuff. Why are you trying to signal to people that actually these lawsuits and other good lawyers like yourself, it's not enough?
Well, really, for 2 reasons, Rachel. The first is that it's not realistic to assume that every provision of every bad law is going to get struck down by court. You know, we won more than we lost in 2019 and 2020. We did better than that in the post-election. But you can't assume that when state after state after state throws the kitchen sink at voters and makes restricting voting rights their top priority, that the courts are going to be there to bat them all back. But the second reason goes, frankly, to the point you made in your introduction, and it is so important, which is that we have a culture problem in the Republican Party, which is that right now, rather than solving the problems of their citizenry, rather than solving the problems of COVID, of a reemerging economy, they are using their precious time in state legislature after state legislature to pass voting restriction laws targeting Black, brown, and young voters. And if that culture doesn't shift, then we win lawsuits and they pass new laws. And then we win lawsuits and they'll pass new laws. At some point, this is only going to change if the Republican Party is able to change. And right now, that doesn't look likely.
What do you think is both doable and the best case scenario for trying to turn that ship around? Obviously, there's things that you wish you could turn people's hearts. You wish you could make people see the world in a different way. It's hard to do that in short order. I know that you have been a very vocal, very impassioned supporter of the For the People Act in the Senate. We don't know if Democrats are going to find a way to get that bill to Joe Biden's desk. What is the best hope that you think is out there in terms of trying to turn this around?
Yeah, so look, I view my role to buy time for democracy. We have, if we can buy time by fighting off the worst of these provisions and give the political process an opportunity to rationalize itself, have Congress pass the For the People Act, that's great. If we can buy time for our democracy and maybe have some shift within the Republican Party, that it stops viewing people voting as an existential threat to the party. Rather, they start to view participation of all Americans as a goal that we should all aspire to, then maybe we succeed. But look, I'm not overly optimistic. All I can do is every day wake up and try to protect democracy by showing up in courtrooms around America and telling judges that it's not right, it's not fair, it's not legal, and it's not constitutional to target Black, brown, and young voters and disenfranchise them.
Mark, let me ask you about another piece of this, which I think is sort of moved in the public consciousness from something that was an object of sort of interest and in some cases an object of fun because it was so ridiculous. These post-election audits or recounts, these third-party interventions where partisan groups and inexperienced, uncertified groups are being given access to voting machines and to ballots in order, it seems plainly, to cast doubt on election results and to make partisans feel like the results that they wanted could have been the real results of the election, if not for some magic pixie dust that had not been sprinkled there. I am starting to see those efforts in a darker light than I think I initially did, because I do think that they're having their desired effect. Is there a legal case to be made there that there are violations of federal law, potentially of state law, in terms of the handling of voting machinery and ballots in the way those audits and recounts are being handled?
Yeah, first of all, I think you're entirely right. I've been trying to scream about this as best I can at the top of my lungs. Alexander Solzhenitsyn, the former Soviet dissident, wrote in 1971 that in the former Soviet Union, the lie had become not just a moral category, but a pillar of the state. And the big lie has moved from a political category, something that Trump and his allies were saying for political purposes, and it is now turning into a pillar of the state. It is becoming a part of state policy. And that's really dangerous. And one of the ways it's doing it is through these audits, because it is giving the veneer of officialness. They're being done through state legislatures, through state officials, and it is allowing the big lie to have the imprimatur of the state. And what happens is when they do these processes, and by the way, these are not audits, these are not recounts. I've been involved in more statewide audits and recounts probably than any other person alive or dead. And I can tell you these are not genuine audits or recounts. But what's happening is they are spoiling the ballots. They are ruining the equipment. Literally, the state of Arizona is going to have to throw away voting machines based on this. And so, yes, do I think it violates federal law? Yeah, I do, because federal law requires that the ballots in federal elections be kept for 22 months after the election. And these ballots have essentially been tainted. Do I think it violates state law in some of these states? Yeah, I think it does. And I wish the judges would view this with the seriousness of democracy being a threat, rather than just feeling like, well, if they humor these crazy people, they'll go away. Because we know when you humor these crazy people, they don't go away. They just keep repeating and making worse.